Hello, dear children. Today, we're going to step into a very special story, a gentle, touching, and magical tale about friendship, kindness, and how the smallest things can change the world. This is the story of Charlotte's Web, one of the most beloved children's books in the world. And now, let's begin part 1. The Little Piglet, the beginning of a wonderful journey between Wilbur the pig, a young girl named Fern, and a wise spider named Charlotte. It was a soft spring morning in the peaceful countryside. Dew still clung to the grass, and a rooster had just let out its first crow of the day. Inside the Arable family's farmhouse, something small, but very important, had just happened. A piglet had been born, tiny, shivering, and so weak that it was thought to be unworthy of keeping. But Fern, a little girl with big eyes and an even bigger heart, thought differently. She couldn't accept that a living creature should be seen as useless just because it was small. And so began a story of friendship, compassion, and miracles, all spun together by the delicate threads of a clever spider named Charlotte. "What are you doing with that axe, Dad?" Fern's voice called out from the kitchen as she spotted her father walking briskly past the door, a shiny axe in his hand. The sky outside was still misty. Sunlight hadn't yet spilled across the yard. Fern usually saw that axe only when her father chopped firewood, but it wasn't winter. Mr. Arable paused and turned around. "There's a litter of piglets in the barn," he said. "One of them is much smaller than the others. It won't survive, Fern. I have to deal with it quickly before it suffers." Fern's eyes widened. She was only 8 years old, but she already understood one thing very clearly: life, any life, is precious. "But Dad, that piglet hasn't done anything wrong," she pleaded. "You can't just kill it because it's smaller than the others." "Fern," he sighed, "you don't understand. The runt won't grow. It'll only get weaker. It's the way things work on a farm. But you haven't even given it a chance." Fern's voice trembled. "You don't know what it could become if someone just cared for it." Mrs. Arable, who was rinsing dishes at the sink, turned her head. "Let your father do what he needs to, Fern. This isn't something a child should worry about." But Fern didn't back down. She ran barefoot out the door, her slippers flying off into the wet morning grass. "Please, Dad, don't kill it. Let me take care of it. I'll feed it. I'll clean up after it. I'll even give it a name." Mr. Arable looked down at his daughter. Her hair was messy, her feet muddy, but her eyes were fierce with conviction. In that moment, he didn't see a little girl fussing over a farm animal. He saw someone willing to protect something small and fragile, just because it mattered. He lowered the axe. "You really want to raise it?" he asked. Fern nodded without hesitation. "Yes. I'll look after it like it's my own baby." He let out another long sigh. "All right, but you're responsible for it. You hear me?" Fern beamed. She ran back to the house, grabbed a milk bottle, a towel, and an old blanket. Then she returned to the barn, where a trembling little piglet lay all alone in the straw. Tiny and scared, but alive. Fern knelt beside the piglet in the straw, gently wrapping it in the soft towel she had brought. Its tiny body trembled, and its eyes were barely open. She cradled it close to her chest, whispering, "You're safe now, little one. I won't let anything happen to you." The piglet made a faint snuffling sound, its small pink nose twitching. Fern smiled and held it tighter. She had never taken care of a baby animal before, but something in her heart told her she could do it. Back at the house, Mrs. Arable wasn't entirely convinced. "You're really going to let her keep it?" she asked her husband as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. "She was so determined," Mr. Arable replied, still shaking his head. "And who knows? Maybe the runt will survive with her looking after it." "She'll get attached," Mrs. Arable warned. "She already is," he said quietly. Fern named the pig Wilbur that very morning. She fed him from a baby bottle every few hours, holding him in her lap and stroking his soft ears. At night, she made a little bed for him in a cardboard box lined with blankets and set it near the stove to keep him warm. Wilbur grew fast. Within days, he was strong enough to stand, then to walk. And soon he was trotting after Fern through the house like a puppy. He followed her into the kitchen, into the garden, and once, even into the bathroom, much to her mother's dismay. "This is not a place for pigs," Mrs. Arable scolded when she found muddy prints across the tile floor. "But he likes to be near me," Fern explained. "He gets lonely. He's a pig, Fern. He belongs outside, in the barn." "He's still a baby," Fern insisted. But it was true, Wilbur was getting bigger. After a month, he had grown too large for the box by the stove. His hoofs clattered across the wooden floors. He knocked over a potted plant in the hallway and chewed the corner of a schoolbook. Reluctantly, Fern agreed to move Wilbur to the barn behind the house. It was warm, filled with fresh hay, and had a small pen just for him. Still, Fern visited him every day before and after school. She brought him apples, warm milk, and sometimes read him stories aloud as he dozed in the straw. Wilbur loved her. He loved her gentle hands, her kind voice, and the way she always smiled when she saw him. For him, Fern wasn't just a friend, she was everything. As the weeks passed, Wilbur grew plumper, stronger, and more curious about the world around him. He rooted through piles of straw, chased insects across the floor of his pen, and squealed with delight when Fern brought him scraps from the kitchen. He had turned from a fragile, trembling piglet into a lively little pig with a snout always sniffing and a tail that curled with joy. But Fern's father had been watching, too. "He's getting too big, Mr. Arable said one morning as they watched Wilbur nudge at a bucket of slop. "We can't keep him here much longer, Fern." Fern's heart dropped. "But he's mine. I've taken care of him." "And you've done a fine job," her father admitted. "But pigs grow up, and grown pigs don't belong in a house with children. He needs a proper home, with space and fences." Fern looked down at her feet. "What will happen to him?" "I talked to your Uncle Homer," Mr. Arable said gently. "He has a barn with room for one more pig. He agreed to buy Wilbur for $6. It's a fair deal. But he won't be mine anymore. You can visit him anytime you want. It'll still be close. He'll be well looked after." That evening, Fern sat in the barn with Wilbur, stroking his back while he lay curled in the straw. "I don't want you to go," she whispered. "But at least you'll have space to run and other animals to talk to. Just promise you won't forget me." Wilbur snorted softly, pressing his snout against her knee. The next morning, Mr. Arable lifted Wilbur into a crate in the back of the truck. Fern rode beside him, her hands gripping the wooden slats of the crate the whole way. She didn't speak much during the drive, only leaned close now and then to whisper comforting words through the gaps. When they reached Zuckerman's farm, Uncle Homer was waiting. He was a big man with a straw hat and a gentle, slow voice. "Well now, that's a fine-looking pig," he said, peering into the crate. He led them around to the barn, a large, weathered structure that smelled of hay and sunshine. Inside, Wilbur's new pen sat empty, the straw fluffed and fresh. As soon as he was placed inside, Wilbur began sniffing, exploring every corner of his new home. It was bigger, that much was true. There were cows in the next stall, and a pair of noisy geese in the yard just outside. Chickens clucked from their perch in the loft. There was life here, more than he'd ever seen. But it wasn't the same without Fern. She stood outside the pen, watching him, her hands gripping the top rail. "Don't worry, Wilbur. I'll come see you every day." Wilbur oinked, but his ears drooped slightly. That night, when the barn was quiet and the lights had gone out, Wilbur lay alone for the first time. The straw was soft, the air warm, but something inside him ached. He missed the warmth of Fern's lap, the sound of her voice, the scent of her clothes. And though he didn't have the words for it yet, he was beginning to learn what loneliness felt like. Days passed on the Zuckerman farm. Wilbur settled into a routine, eating, sleeping, rooting around his pen, and listening to the distant sounds of the other animals. But even with the cows lowing and the geese honking, something felt missing. He missed Fern. She still came to visit, just as she promised, but now it was only once a day after school. She would stand by the fence, toss him scraps or an apple, and talk to him for a little while. Wilbur loved those moments, but as soon as she left, the barn felt empty again. "I'm lonely," Wilbur said aloud one morning, looking up at the wooden beams above. "I need a friend." The goose in the nearby yard honked back. "Friend? Ha! Pigs don't need friends. You've got food, water, and shelter. That's all a pig needs." Wilbur didn't agree. He tried talking to the sheep in the pen beside him, but they only mumbled sleepily. The cows were gentle but dull, always chewing and never answering. The rats in the walls laughed at him. Even the chickens ignored him. "I want someone to talk to," Wilbur sighed. "Someone who cares about me." One rainy afternoon, he called out to the barn in frustration. "Isn't there anyone who will be my friend?" His voice echoed slightly among the wooden rafters, then faded into the sound of raindrops on the roof. Silence. Wilbur lay down, pressed his snout into the straw, and closed his eyes. The sound of the rain made everything feel heavier. He thought about Fern and the warmth of her arms, and how she used to sing to him in the morning. He didn't know that someone had heard him. High up in the shadows of the barn, near the corner where two beams met, a small creature had been listening. She had 8 legs, a round body, and eyes that glimmered in the dim light. She had watched Wilbur since he first arrived. Quietly, curiously. That night, as Wilbur drifted into sleep, a gentle voice spoke, thin and clear, like wind through a crack in the wall. "I'll be your friend." Wilbur's ears twitched. He opened one eye and looked around the dark barn. Nothing moved, except the shifting straw in the breeze. "Who said that?" he whispered. But there was no answer. Only the creak of the old barn and the soft sound of the rain easing into silence. He fell asleep wondering if he had dreamed it. The next morning, Wilbur awoke early. Sunlight streamed in through the cracks in the barn boards, casting golden stripes across the straw. He yawned, stretched his legs, and looked around his pen. Everything was as it had been the day before: the empty water trough, the leftover bits of apple from Fern's visit, the sound of a distant rooster welcoming the day. And yet, something felt different. He remembered the voice. A small, kind voice that had whispered, "I'll be your friend." It had been so soft, almost like a dream, but Wilbur knew he had heard it. He just didn't know where it had come from. "Hello," he called, lifting his snout toward the rafters. "Is anyone up there?" Silence. He tried again. If you really said you'd be my friend, would you talk to me now?" Still, nothing but the flutter of pigeons in the loft and the scrape of a breeze against the wooden walls. Disappointed, Wilbur lowered his head and wandered to the back of his pen. He rooted through the straw a little, nibbled a piece of carrot, then laid down with a sigh. He was still alone. That afternoon, Fern came to visit. She leaned over the fence and gave him a scratch behind the ears. "Hey there, Wilbur," she said with a smile. "You're looking strong. And fat." She giggled. "That's a good thing for pigs. You know." Wilbur oinked happily and trotted in circles, just to make her laugh again. "I wish I could stay longer," she said. "But Mom says I have homework." She gave him one last pat. "Be good. Okay?" He watched her walk away down the path, the bow in her hair bouncing behind her. The barn felt quieter than ever once she was gone. That night, after the sun went down and the stars began to twinkle over the fields, Wilbur curled up in the straw, his heart a little heavier than usual. Then, just as his eyes were starting to close, he heard it again, a voice, soft and steady, floating from above. "I said I'd be your friend," it said. Wilbur sat up quickly. "You're real," he whispered. "Yes," the voice replied. "I've been watching you for days now. You're kind and polite, and I think you could use someone to talk to." "I could," Wilbur said, his ears standing tall. "Oh, I really could." "Who are you?" "You'll see me in the morning," said the voice gently. "Now rest. Tomorrow will be a good day." And with that, the voice faded into silence once more. Wilbur smiled for the first time in many days. He didn't know exactly who had spoken to him, or what she looked like. But something told him, deep in his small, hopeful heart, that his lonely days might finally be over. Dear little ones, in part 1, we met a tiny pig named Wilbur, a small creature full of hope. Now, let's step into part 2 of the story Charlotte's Web, where Wilbur begins to feel very lonely. But then, a strange voice whispers to him in the dark. That is the moment Wilbur meets Charlotte, the wise spider who will change his life forever. Wilbur was lonely. Even though the barn was full of animals, geese, sheep, cows, even a rat that scurried in and out of the shadows, none of them wanted to play with him. They had their own lives, their own groups, and didn't think a young pig had much to say. He tried to make friends with the goose. "Good morning," he squealed one day, standing on his tiny hooves and wagging his tail. The goose looked over at him, blinked once, and went back to preening its feathers. He turned to the sheep. "Would you like to talk?" The old sheep just chewed slowly and said, "Too young. Too noisy." Even Templeton the rat, who lived in the dark corners of the barn and only came out when no one was looking, hissed at Wilbur when he offered to share an apple core. So Wilbur ate alone. He napped alone. He dreamed alone. Worst of all, Fern didn't come to visit as often as before. Now that school had started again, she only came after classes, sometimes just for a few minutes. She would wave to him, toss him a treat, and say, "I'll be back tomorrow, Wilbur." But tomorrow always felt far away. Wilbur sighed. "I wish I had a friend," he said one afternoon, looking up at the wooden beams high above his pen. Someone to talk to. Someone who would listen. There was no answer. Just the quiet creaking of the barn and the rustle of hay. That night the barn was quiet. The cows were lying down in their stalls. The sheep were curled in the corner, breathing softly. Even the geese had stopped their constant chattering and tucked their heads under their wings. But Wilbur was wide awake. He stood in the straw, staring into the dark. "Why won't anyone talk to me?" he whispered. "Am I really that different?" A tear rolled down his cheek. He sniffled and lay down again, curling his tail around his body. And then, a soft, clear voice drifted down from above. "I'll be your friend." Wilbur's ears twitched. He sat up quickly, eyes wide. "Who said that?" he asked. No answer came right away. The barn creaked again. And for a moment he thought he had imagined it. "Hello," he called, louder this time. "Did someone say something?" "Yes," the voice said gently. "I did." Wilbur stood up on his short legs, turning in circles, trying to see where the voice was coming from. "Where are you?" he asked. "Up here," said the voice. "In the corner." "I'm on my web." Wilbur looked up. In the faint light coming through the barn boards, he could just barely make out the shimmer of a spider web stretched between two wooden beams. And right in the middle of it, a small shadow. "I can't see you very well," Wilbur said. "You will in the morning," the voice replied. Wilbur's heart was pounding. A friend. Someone to talk to. "What's your name?" he asked. "Charlotte," the voice said. "Charlotte A. Kavatica." "That's a beautiful name," said Wilbur. There was a pause. "Thank you," Charlotte said. And then, silence again. But it wasn't the lonely kind of silence anymore. The next morning, Wilbur awoke with a yawn and stretched his little legs. Sunlight streamed into the barn, casting warm golden rays across the straw. The air smelled fresh, and for the first time in days, Wilbur felt a little spark of excitement. He remembered the voice. Quickly, he looked up to the corner of the barn where he had heard it. There, glinting in the light, was a perfect, delicate spider web. And in the center of the web sat a spider, small, brown, and graceful, with long legs and bright, shiny eyes. "Good morning," Wilbur called. "Good morning to you," the spider replied. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, I did. Because of you," Wilbur said, trotting in a little circle. "You really meant it, didn't you? You'll be my friend?" "I already am," said the spider calmly. "I told you last night. My name is Charlotte." "I'm Wilbur," he said happily. "But I guess you already knew that." Charlotte nodded. "Yes. I've been watching you." Wilbur's ears twitched with curiosity. "From up there?" Charlotte smiled. "Spiders notice things. We don't make a lot of noise, but we see and hear quite a lot." Wilbur sat down in the straw, his eyes never leaving Charlotte's web. "I've never had a friend like you," he said softly. "Everyone else here is too busy, or too old, or just doesn't care." "I care," said Charlotte. "You're different from the others. You're kind and polite." Wilbur blushed as much as a pig could blush. "Thank you," he said. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Charlotte began tidying up her web, skillfully spinning new threads with her back legs. Wilbur watched in awe. "You're amazing." "I practice a lot," Charlotte replied. "A good web doesn't build itself." Wilbur laughed. "You must be very clever." "I try to be," said Charlotte. "You'll find that I'm not just a friend, I'm also very good at solving problems." Wilbur didn't know what kind of problems a spider could solve, but at that moment, he didn't care. All he knew was that, for the first time since he arrived at the Zuckerman barn, he wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. As the days passed, Wilbur and Charlotte talked every morning. They shared stories, played word games, and told each other what they saw or heard in the barn. Wilbur asked 1,000 questions, and Charlotte always had an answer. "What do you eat?" Wilbur asked one day. "Flies," Charlotte answered. "And bugs. I catch them in my web." Wilbur blinked. "You eat bugs?" "Of course," she said. "That's what spiders do." Wilbur looked a little uneasy. "Isn't that kind of mean?" Charlotte paused and looked down at him with her calm, steady eyes. "Not really," she said. "It's how I stay alive. Just like you eat leftover milk or slops from the pail, I eat insects." It may seem unpleasant to you, but to me, it's dinner. Wilbur thought for a moment. I guess that makes sense. I understand if it bothers you, Charlotte added. But don't let it ruin our friendship. We're very different, you and I. But that doesn't mean we can't care about each other. Wilbur nodded. I still like you. You're smart and nice and, well, I've never had anyone to talk to like this before. Charlotte's 8 legs twitched slightly in a kind of spider smile. And you're honest. That's rare. The barn grew warmer as the sun climbed higher. Dust floated in the air like golden specks. Somewhere in the corner, the goose muttered something in her sleep. Wilbur gazed up at Charlotte again. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here too, she said. Just then, Templeton the rat poked his head out from under the trough. He sniffed the air, twitched his nose and gave Charlotte a wary glance. Talking to spiders now? He sneered. What's next? Friends with the broom? Wilbur ignored him. Charlotte looked unimpressed. Hello, Templeton. The rat scurried away without another word. Charlotte returned her gaze to Wilbur. Don't let him bother you. He only looks out for himself. Wilbur sighed. I don't like him. You don't have to, said Charlotte. Just don't be like him. Wilbur smiled. I'll try. And with that, Charlotte turned back to her web, spinning a perfect spiral of silk. While Wilbur lay down beneath her and closed his eyes. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the barn grew quiet again, Wilbur watched Charlotte finish weaving her web. Her legs moved with such grace, spinning and pulling, tying each thread perfectly in place. Wilbur could hardly believe something so small could create something so strong and beautiful. Your web is amazing, he whispered. Charlotte paused and looked down. Thank you. I've been making webs since I was born. It's what I do best. Wilbur yawned and curled up in the straw. The air smelled of hay and warm wood. Crickets chirped outside. Charlotte? He said softly. Yes, Wilbur? I'm really glad you talked to me that night. Charlotte smiled. So am I. Friends come when you least expect them. Sometimes all it takes is a little hello in the dark. Wilbur thought about that. I was so lonely, he said. I know, said Charlotte. But you're not alone anymore. Wilbur closed his eyes and smiled. Good night, Charlotte. Good night, Wilbur, she replied gently. And as the stars twinkled above the quiet barn, a tiny spider watched over her new friend, her web shining silver in the moonlight. A new chapter in Wilbur's life had begun. Thank you to all the little ones and parents for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed the journey of Wilbur and Charlotte, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next parts. Every like and every subscriber gives us the motivation to keep bringing gentle and meaningful stories to children. See you again in part 3, Words on the Web. Dear little ones, in the last part, Wilbur found a wonderful friend, the gentle and clever spider, Charlotte. But joy doesn't last long. Wilbur learns a very sad truth. He might be taken away when winter comes. Can Charlotte do something magical to save her little friend? Let's begin Chapter 3, Words on the Web. Where a miracle begins, spun from the tiniest threads of a spider's web. One morning, as the sun peeked through the cracks in the old barn walls, Wilbur woke up feeling peaceful. He had slept well under the warm straw, and Charlotte was still quietly resting in her web. Everything seemed calm, but that calm wouldn't last. Later that day, Wilbur overheard a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. The sheep were talking in low voices. I heard Mr. Zuckerman say that Wilbur's getting big and fat, said one of the older sheep. Yes, another replied, and you know what that means. When winter comes, they'll want to make ham and bacon. Wilbur's ears twitched. He froze. Ham? He whispered. Bacon? His heart began to race. His tiny body trembled. No, that can't be true. But the sheep weren't joking. They weren't mean, just honest. It was the way of life on the farm. But for Wilbur, it was terrifying. He ran in circles, squealing. I don't want to die. I don't want to be Bacon. The goose tried to calm him. Now, Wilbur, don't flap your flippers. I mean. Hooves. But Wilbur was panicking. He cried and cried, rolling in the straw. That night, Charlotte looked down from her web with concern. Wilbur, she said gently. What's the matter? Wilbur sniffled. I heard them talking. They're going to kill me. When winter comes. I don't want to die, Charlotte. I'm too young. I haven't done anything wrong. Charlotte waited a moment. Then she spoke slowly, clearly. You will not die, she said. Wilbur blinked. But how can you be sure? Because, Charlotte said. I'm going to save you. Wilbur stared up at Charlotte, his eyes wide and wet with tears. You're going to save me? He whispered. Charlotte nodded. Yes. I don't know how yet, but I promise you. I will think of something. Wilbur lay down slowly, his little heart still thumping in his chest. No one's ever said that to me before. Charlotte's voice was calm and certain. A promise is a promise. The next day, Charlotte didn't talk much. She stayed in her web, quiet and thoughtful. Her 8 legs twitched slightly as she paced along the silken strands. She was thinking, how do you save a pig? She muttered to herself. How do you keep humans from doing what they've always done? Down below, Wilbur played with a bit of straw, trying not to think about bacon, or winter, or anything sharp. Charlotte watched him silently. You're special, she whispered. You just need them to see it. Suddenly, a breeze stirred the straw. And a tiny idea drifted through Charlotte's mind like a thread of silk. She clutched the edge of her web. Aha, she said softly. What if I told them? What if I told them he was special? In writing? She turned toward the beam above Wilbur's pen and looked at the perfect space between 2 posts. Yes, they believe what they read. Humans are funny that way. She began to hum to herself, a little spider tune, and started to spin. That night, Charlotte worked in silence. She wasn't just spinning a web. She was beginning a miracle. The morning sun rose gently over the barn, casting golden light across the dusty wooden beams. The air smelled of hay and warm earth. All was still. Then Mrs. Zuckerman stepped into the barn to bring Wilbur his breakfast. She stopped. Her basket dropped to the floor with a soft thud. Look, she gasped, clutching her apron. Mr. Zuckerman rushed in behind her. What is it? What's wrong? She pointed up to the corner of the barn, to the web stretched wide between 2 beams. There, shining in the soft morning light, were 2 words, woven carefully, beautifully, right in the center of Charlotte's web. Some pig. Mr. Zuckerman's mouth dropped open. He blinked and stepped closer. Some pig? He said aloud. The letters shimmered with dew. The web was perfectly spun. And Wilbur stood directly beneath it, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. He hadn't even noticed the words yet. Mr. Zuckerman turned to his wife. Did you see this? Did you read it? I did, she whispered. It's a miracle. Mr. Zuckerman ran to the house. Get the neighbors. Get the minister. Get the newspaper. Soon, the barn was full of people. Some wore overalls. Some wore Sunday clothes. Everyone pointed. Everyone gasped. And Wilbur? He just stood there, ears twitching, unsure what all the fuss was about. Then he saw it. He saw the words. Some pig. He looked up at Charlotte, who hung quietly in her web, her face calm. Did you do that? He asked. Charlotte didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Do you like it?" Wilbur nodded slowly. "It's amazing." Charlotte gave a small smile. "That's just the beginning." In the days that followed, people came from miles away to see the miracle pig. Cars lined the road. Children pointed. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras clicked. Some even brought binoculars just to stare at the web. All to see Wilbur, and the words above his head. Mr. Zuckerman stood taller than usual. He wore clean overalls every morning. He gave interviews. He smiled. Wilbur's pen was swept and polished. He had fresh hay every day. He was fed extra corn and given warm milk. And Charlotte? Charlotte stayed quiet in her web, spinning and thinking. "That first word worked well," she said to herself one night. "But they'll need more to stay impressed. Humans forget quickly." She crawled down to speak with Wilbur. "I need help," she said. "We'll need more words." Wilbur blinked. "More? Yes. Something even better. But I need someone to find good words. Something catchy. Something bold." At that moment, Templeton the rat scurried by. Charlotte called out, "Templeton." The rat stopped, one whisker twitching. "What do you want, Spider?" "I need you to go to the dump. Bring me scraps of paper, old labels. Anything with interesting words." Templeton sniffed. "Why should I?" "Because," Charlotte said smoothly, "if Wilbur lives, the food scraps keep coming. If he doesn't, well, no more leftovers." Templeton twitched his nose. A fair point." And off he went, grumbling under his breath but already thinking about crumbs and cake wrappers. Later that night, Charlotte spun again. This time, the word was terrific. The next morning, the crowd gasped again. "She's done it again," someone cried. "This pig is terrific." And once again, the story spread. Wilbur looked up at Charlotte in awe. "You're amazing." Charlotte didn't say much. She just kept working. The days grew warmer. The crowds grew bigger. And Charlotte kept spinning. With Templeton's help, she collected new words from boxes, candy wrappers, magazines tossed into the trash. Each night, she studied them carefully, testing how they would look in silk. Then she chose the next word, radiant. She spun it as the stars faded and dawn crept into the barn. Once again, people gasped. Some fell silent. Others clapped. "A radiant pig," they exclaimed. Wilbur was washed with warm water. He was brushed until he shone. People said he sparkled in the sun, just like the web. Wilbur smiled shyly. He didn't fully understand why he was special. But Charlotte did. She had one more word in mind. The final word. Something quiet. Something true. That night, Charlotte spun slowly, carefully, lovingly. Humble. Wilbur woke to see it glowing in the morning light. He didn't know what humble meant. So Charlotte explained, "It means not proud. It means kind and simple. It means you." Wilbur lowered his head. "That's a good word," he said softly. Charlotte nodded. "It's the most important of all." The crowds kept coming. Journalists wrote articles. Wilbur's story was on the radio. People called it a miracle. And through it all, Charlotte stayed in her corner, quiet and still. No one asked about the spider. No one thanked her. But Wilbur knew. And every night before sleep, he whispered, "Thank you, Charlotte." Studio microphone. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed the journey of Wilbur and Charlotte, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Every like and every subscriber gives us the love and motivation to bring you more gentle, meaningful stories. See you again in Chapter 4, The County Fair. Dear little ones, in the last chapter, Charlotte spun magical words into her web, words that made Wilbur famous, and maybe even safe. But now, a big event is coming. A place full of colors, sounds, laughter, and ribbons, the county fair. And with it comes a new challenge. Can Charlotte save Wilbur one more time? One bright morning, excitement buzzed through the barn. Mr. Zuckerman stood at Wilbur's pen, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. That pig, he said, is going to the fair. Wilbur's ears perked up. The fair? He squealed. The other animals gasped. Even the goose honked twice. The county fair, said the old sheep. That's a big deal. Wilbur danced in circles. I've never been to a fair. Is it fun? Will there be rides? Will there be popcorn? Templeton the rat poked his head from a hole. There'll be garbage, he muttered, licking his whiskers. Wonderful. Sticky. Leftover garbage. Charlotte listened from her web in the rafters. She knew the fair could be good, or very dangerous. That night, Wilbur whispered, Charlotte, are you coming with me? Charlotte hesitated. It's a long trip, she said quietly. And I'm not as strong as I used to be. Wilbur's eyes widened. But I need you. Charlotte nodded slowly. Then I'll come. She didn't say more. But inside, she felt a quiet fear. The fair was bright and loud and full of people. It was also Wilbur's last chance. The next morning, the whole farm buzzed with excitement. Fern arrived with her brother Avery, skipping toward the barn. We're going to the fair, she sang. And Wilbur's coming too. Avery ran ahead. I heard they have a pig contest. Maybe he'll win a ribbon. Wilbur stood proudly in his pen. He had been bathed with warm water and scrubbed with a soft brush. His skin glowed pink and clean. His hooves were polished. His tail was curled just right. I look fancy, Wilbur said, blushing. You look terrific, said Charlotte kindly from above. Templeton waddled out from the hay. Is it time yet? He grumbled. I've been waiting for the trash piles. Wilbur turned to Charlotte. Will it be scary? Charlotte thought for a moment. The fair is busy, noisy, full of people. But stay close. I'll be nearby. Wilbur nodded bravely. Later that day, the Zuckermans backed up their truck. They built a small pen in the back, filled it with straw, and gently lifted Wilbur inside. Fern climbed into the front seat with a big smile. Ready? Wilbur squeaked softly. I think so. Just as they were about to leave, Charlotte dropped quietly from her web. She crawled along a fence post and onto the truck, tucking herself under a slat where no one would see. Templeton, of course, hopped in too, into a small crate with apple cores and cookie crumbs. And off they went, toward the fair, toward the unknown. The fairgrounds were loud and full of color. There were children laughing, music playing, and delicious smells of popcorn, cotton candy, and roasted peanuts floating in the air. Flags flapped in the breeze. Ribbons fluttered on booths. Ferris wheels turned slowly in the distance. Wilbur peeked out from his crate as the truck pulled in. This place is huge, he whispered. Templeton popped his head out of a paper bag. I smell funnel cakes, he said dreamily. Wilbur's pen was placed inside a large livestock barn, where rows and rows of other pigs stood. Some were much larger than him, thick, heavy, with deep grunts and curly tails. Wilbur's eyes grew wide. Charlotte, he whispered, look at them. They're so big. Charlotte, hanging from a small post nearby, observed quietly. One of the pigs snorted and said, You're the miracle pig, huh? Don't look like much. Wilbur's ears drooped. Maybe I shouldn't be here, he said sadly. Charlotte spun down slowly. You belong here, Wilbur. You're special, not just because of size. But they're huge, he said. And strong. And shiny. They don't have what you have, Charlotte said. Heart, kindness, humbleness, and a friend. Wilbur looked up at her. You still believe in me? Charlotte smiled gently. I never stopped. That night, as the lights of the fair twinkled above and the crowd grew quiet, Charlotte returned to her work. She spun a new web, fresh and perfect. And there, in careful letters, she began her next word. The crowds kept growing. Wilbur became the center of the fair. Children pointed, grown-ups whispered, reporters scribbled, but through it all, Charlotte remained quiet. She was tired now. Each word had taken strength, and the fair had taken more. But she had one word left. That night, when the moon was high and the barn was still, Charlotte spun again, slower this time, more gently than ever. Her silk stretched into letters, simple and true. The final word, humble. At sunrise, the fair erupted with excitement. "A humble pig," shouted one woman. "That's the best kind." "Humble and radiant," said another. "Unbelievable." Zuckerman beamed. Fern clapped. Wilbur just stared at the web, his eyes wide and shining. "I don't know what it means," he whispered. Charlotte answered softly, "It means not proud. It means gentle. It means you." Wilbur lowered his head and smiled. "That's a good word," he said. The judges agreed. Wilbur didn't win first prize for biggest pig, but something better. Sports medal, a special ribbon for Zuckerman's famous pig. Everyone cheered. Wilbur would not be sold. He would not be slaughtered. He would live. All because of a quiet little spider. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed the journey of Wilbur and Charlotte, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Every like and every subscriber gives us the love and motivation to bring you more gentle, meaningful stories. Glowing Star, see you again in Chapter 5, A Farewell and a Promise. Thank you so much for joining us on the heartwarming journey of Wilbur and Charlotte. From a little piglet on the farm to some pig at the county fair, all because of a spider's kindness. And a friendship that changed everything. But the story isn't over yet. In the next part, Charlotte faces her greatest challenge, and Wilbur learns what it means to remember, to protect, and to love. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you won't miss the next chapter. Glowing Star, see you again in Part 5, A Farewell and a Promise.